ポチタ、仕事に行くぜ。
Shigoto is a noun that means work. Ni has various usages, but here it is marking direction. Iku means to go, and ze is a sentence-ending particle that adds force or emphasis. Think of it as adding feeling more than it being a word, mainly used by men. Therefore, this literally means pochita, to go to work. But we must still deduce the pronoun from the context. Considering this particular scenario, the most reasonable choices are I and we. Denji could be referring to himself, or to him and Pochita, so we could interpret this as Pochita, I go to work, or Pochita, we go to work. Let's also remember that there's no distinction between simple present tense and future tense in Japanese. Therefore, we could also interpret it as Pochita, I will go to work, or Pochita, we will go to work. In this particular scene, we can assume that Denji is saying, Pochita, we will go to work, almost like saying, let's go to work. And for those who are strict with grammar and translation, allow me to be clear. By no means is Denji saying, let's go to work. In order for it to be accurately translated as such, we must use the volitional form. Iku, Godan type verb, the last u sound becomes o, iko, let's go. So, Pochita, shigoto ni ikouze, eyo Pochita, let's go to work. This is a more accurate let's go. But Denji said, Pochita, shigoto ni ikuze, not ikouze. So I'll leave this interpretation as, eyo Pochita, we'll go to work.
ポチタ、俺は悪魔と戦ってるうちに死ぬかもしれねえ。
Ore means I. Wa is a particle that indicates the topic of the sentence. Akuma means demon. To is a particle with different applications, but here it means with demons. Tatakatteru comes from the verb tatakao, to fight, in its teiru form. First we turn it to its te form. Godan type verb, last u becomes te. Tatakatte, and now we add iru. Tatakatteru. We often drop the i in iru during speech. The meaning doesn't change at all, and it actually sounds more natural. Tatakatteru, to be fighting. As you see, the teiru form turns a verb from its plain form to its present continuous form. Check the following examples. Ushini means while to be fighting. There are two other ways to say while in Japanese, so keep tabs on this channel to not miss out on more content like this. Shinu means to die, and kamoshirenai means might. Therefore, we can interpret this sentence as, Pochita, I might die while fighting with a demon.
そうしたらポチタだけが心残りだ。
So shitara means in that case, or if so. Dake means only. Ga is a particle that indicates the subject of the sentence. It usually stresses a little more whatever we're talking about. Kokoro nokori means regret, and da is a copula used to assert or affirm something, often interpreted as to be. Therefore, this literally means, in that case, only pochita, to be regret. Let's shape this in a way that sounds more natural in English. Considering this scenario, in that case refers to in case I die while fighting with a demon. So, only pochita to be regret could be interpreted as pochita will be my only regret.
Akuma には死んだ人の体を乗っ取れるやつもいるらしい。
Akuma means demon. Niwa means for, or any of these. Shinda comes from the verb shinu, to die, in its past form. Godan type verb, last nu becomes nda, shinda, died. Hito means people or person. Now, when you see a noun coming right after a verb, just as what we're witnessing, it means that the noun performs or experiences the course of action. Let's check out the following examples. Considering the examples we just looked at, this means people that died, or we could also interpret it as dead people. Karada means body. And no is a particle that claims property. Let's look at some examples. Therefore, this means bodies of dead people. We could also rearrange it as dead people's bodies. O is a particle that indicates the direct object. It doesn't have a meaning, it's only used as a section marker. No toreru comes from the verb notoru, to take possession or to take over, in its potential form. Godan type verb, last u sound becomes e, and then we add ru, notoreru, to be able to take possession. Yatsu is used to represent an element within the sentence. It can go from an object to a person. Its literal meaning, in fact, is thing or guy. In this case, since we mentioned demons before, it most likely refers to it. If we take a closer look, we face once again a noun coming right after a verb structure, so it must undergo the same process we did before. Things that can take possession of dead people's bodies. This mo plus iru combo means there is some / there are some, and it comes from pairing up the particle mo, which means to, also, even, and the verb iru, to exist, which is often interpreted as there is or there are. Finally, dashi, apparently or seemingly. Reviewing all parts of the sentence we have, as for demons, things that can take possession of dead people's bodies, there are some, apparently. And putting it all together with a small tweak we get, apparently among demons, there are some that can take possession of dead people's bodies. Subscribe to this channel if you found this content useful, and don't forget to leave a like. It helps us a lot with the algorithm. Also, YouTube thinks you'll enjoy watching this next video. Have a great day afternoon. Ja ne.